Blog Talk Radio.
There'll be spectacle, there'll be fantasy, there'll be daring do and stuff like you would never see.
Hey, a movie, yeah, we're gonna be a movie,
Starring everybody
and me. There'll be heroes bold, there'll be comedy, and a lot of fuss that ends for us real happily. Hey, a movie, we can watch it all develop, starring everybody
and me. We'll take the world and set it on its ear.
Come on, join in. We're gonna start right here.
Hey, we are going to start right here. Hello, welcome to 411's newest podcast, the 411 Mania Summer Blockbuster Series Movie Review. I am your host, the mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And joining me tonight to review, we're going to be doing this every once in a while, starting with the very first movie of the Summer Blockbuster Series, Iron Man 3, and here to help me discuss Iron Man 3, perennial 411 reviewer extraordinaire, the 401 jack of all trades, Mr. Jeff Harris. How you doing, Jeff?
Good evening, Mark. Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, Los Angeles. And as the Muppets say, don't forget to watch your movie. Don't forget to watch your show. We're here to have a good time.
That's right. Waka, waka, waka. All right. Jeff did an excellent review of Iron Man 3, the latest installment in the connected Marvel universe and ostensibly the end of the Iron Man trilogy. And this is going to act as a supplement. These podcasts that we're going to do over the course of the summer, when both Jeff and I actually make it to the movies to see one of the blockbusters, these will act as a supplement to the online review, which you can read over at 401mania.com in the movie zone. So, right from the start, I don't want to talk necessarily about the stuff that Jeff covered in the review. And let me say right now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie yet, this podcast will include spoilers. We will be talking
Spoiler alert!
Yes, spoiler alert. We will be talking about what actually happens in the movie, including the big plot twist and all of that. So if you don't want to know what happens, pause this, go see the movie, come back. All right. Jeff, I want to talk about the elephant.
That was your spoiler warning. So, folks, if you're still listening now and you don't want to get spoiled, it's your fault, okay? And I don't want to hear any complaining on Facebook.
Exactly, or in the comment section. All right, Jeff, let's get right into. Well, first, let me ask you this: did you like the movie? Did you actually sit down and, just as a fan of Marvel movies and summer blockbuster movies in general, were you entertained for 2+ hours?
I definitely was. Yes, I was entertained. I had a good time.
So did I. I've seen people complaining about the movie. It seems to be a fair split between people who thought the movie was utter garbage, which I don't. I happen to know one of those people who thought it was utter garbage, and for the benefit of this podcast, he shall remain nameless. But I don't understand why people have such a problem with this movie, and I guess we can talk a little bit about that. But I do want to get to the big elephant in the room, because I know you did discuss this, and I want to get your thoughts on it. So, as we know, if you've seen the movie, you're set up to think that the big villain in this thing is the Mandarin, and it turns out that the big villain in this thing is not the Mandarin. He is a false face for the terrorist organization AIM, which was also a fairly big entity in the Marvel universe of comics. And it turns out that the guy running AIM, who is Adrian Killian, is...
We could probably, just before we really get into this, Mark, we could probably spend like 20 podcasts in 3 hours talking about all the backstory. We're talking, we have 50 years of backstory to go on.
Right. No, and I obviously don't want to do that. I don't want to bog this down. But you're set up to think that it's Mandarin. It ends up being the guy who's running AIM, and this annoyed the living shit out of people, as near as I can tell. If there's one thing that people complained about with this movie was that Mandarin ended up not being the Mandarin, but ended up being Shecky the Clown. So what did you think about that, Jeff? We read your review. Just expand upon that.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, Mark. If you go by the recent statements by the writer, the co-writer and the director, Shane Black, the Mandarin is actually in the movie. The Mandarin is Aldrich Killian, as played by Guy Pearce. That according to Shane Black, that was the Mandarin. That was their interpretation of the Mandarin. And there's actually a very good story on Entertainment Weekly that examines the whole genesis of how they went this way. For the last several years, they've been trying to incorporate the Mandarin in this movie. But, of course, that's sort of a whole can of worm in itself. When the Mandarin was first created in the 1960s, I mean, it was the 1960s. It was a different time. I'm not saying that makes it right, but the Mandarin was essentially a yellow apparel Asian stereotype. He was a Chinese villain. I mean, for some Asian people, even the term Mandarin itself has a bit of a racial connotation. Since that time, of course, the Mandarin, the character, he has been updated. He has been modernized. He's still Asian, but he's more of a, he's been made into more of an evolved 21st century character. But comics audiences, the people who read comics, and the amount of people who read comics now is a drop in the bucket compared to what is needed to make a movie like this successful. And these movies are big events, not just in the U.S. anymore, all over the world. Disney, they wanted Chinese money for the movie. They made this movie a Chinese co-production with DMG Entertainment. China has very strict laws about how certain things are represented in their entertainment. And I guess the conclusion was the way the Mandarin is in the comics, even as he's developed over time, does not work in a movie like this today. They put the Mandarin in early drafts of the first Iron Man movie. Instead, he was taken out. They made Obadiah Stane, Jeff Bridges, the actual villain, and they had a reference to a Ten Rings organization. The Ten Rings, of course, represents the Ten Rings of the Mandarin. That motif was back in this movie. So we always had this expectation that we would see the Mandarin at some point. But then Shane Black comes out a little while ago at a comic convention. He says, yeah, I don't like the Mandarin. He's a racist stereotype. Then he comes to Comic-Con. We see Ben Kingsley as the Mandarin. Okay. They're kind of reinventing the Mandarin. It makes sense. A lot of directors, they kind of reinvent these characters for the movies. Chris Nolan did it, with the Joker, with Ra's al Ghul, not Ra's al Ghul, Bane. So it kind of makes sense. This is their idea of updating the Mandarin. So we're kind of getting into this idea. Okay, Ben Kingsley, he's an Oscar-winning actor. He's a Shakespearean actor. He's giving a new take on the Mandarin that's kind of uses the iconography of the character in the comics, but also kind of plays off of Osama bin Laden and sort of what's going on with the war on terror today. And that was still in play in the movie. And I'm kind of getting off track here, but Shane Black essentially trolled us. The way it was executed in the movie.
Why does it have to be a troll?
No, let me finish my thought here. Here's my take on it. We got trolled. We got played, however you want to say it. The twist was well executed. It was funny. The way Ben Kingsley played it was entertaining and funny. But still, you're kind of left with, well, that's it. And even going along with Shane Black's explanation of Aldrich Killian is the Mandarin, I'm kind of like, ultimately I came to this conclusion. These Iron Man movies have never really had a very strong villain. And to that, I said you have the Mandarin, who has always been Iron Man's he's Iron Man's Lex Luthor, his Joker, what have you. That's what he's always been. But even saying that, Iron Man's always had sort of a weak group of rogues gallery. Rogues gallery refers to like a specific, like a superhero's character, his set of villains that menaces him in the comics. So I think just looking at it that way, these movies are more about a showcase for Robert Downey Jr. being cool and having fun in like a big action setting, more so than the villains. He's never really had a good set of villains. But besides that, I think the movie worked. It was entertaining. I think it's just that after the Avengers, some people's expectations were set unreasonably high. And I think Kevin Feige, I think what his problem is that he kind of plays us, and like Shane Black kind of plays us and kind of gives us expectations for us to see things that aren't really there. I think he kind of, and he's not the only one guilty of this. I think sometimes they kind of set us up by kind of dangling the carrot for us, and we're looking for things that don't really come to fruition. So that's kind of what I think the problem with Marvel was there. But, I mean, the movie itself, it's a fun, entertaining summer ride. Marvel always does a great job of kicking off the summer movie season. They've been doing that for like 10 years. So all in all, it was a good movie. But, I mean, the review, since the movie came out, the newer reviews are a little mixed, and that's fair. You know, some people are not going to be okay with this plot twist. But what do you have to say about it, Mark?
Well, I don't disagree with a whole lot of what you said there in terms of your opinion. I've always said, and I've said this a lot on The Long Road to Ruin and in private conversations, movies are not comic books. Movies are not books.
Exactly.
The execution of these things is very, very different. You know, Iron Man existed for decades before it ever got onto the silver screen, and then they have to take morsels of this long legacy of the comic book and try to fit it into a 2-hour movie, you know, or 6 hours when you do it over 3. So you're never going to have a complete translation of the comic book to the silver screen. I think what the best that you can hope for is that they're going to tell you an entertaining story for 2 hours, and that's why I don't have a problem with the Mandarin twist as it's portrayed in this movie. When you look at what the object of Killian was and what his motivations were and what he was set out to do, it would make sense that he would want to play on the fears of Americans by using something as iconographic as something that resembles very much Osama bin Laden. So that all made sense to me. It would, and the way Ben Kingsley then plays it when the jig is up, you're right. It was very funny. It was very entertaining. And this is the point that I wanted to make about the Iron Man villains as such. I always felt that Iron Man's greatest villain was Tony Stark. And now you're a big comic book guy, so I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that since that was kind of a shot. But I really do. I feel like the thing that people remember most about Iron Man is Tony Stark's inner demons. And while I didn't read a tremendous amount of Iron Man. I mostly read the Avengers overall, and I read Captain America and such. My experience with the Iron Man comics was Tony Stark's alcoholism, Tony Stark just dealing with himself in the role. So, you know, my feeling was that was one of the driving points of this movie in particular, given it's set after the Avengers movie. And to that extent, and this may just be the psychologist in me coming out, but I thought they played on that extremely well. And it's a thread through all of the movies, is Tony Stark dealing with his inner demons.
I mean, that is an important thread in the comics. You know, Tony Stark, he's a weapons maker. What happens when the weapons fall into the wrong hands? You know, he takes a bit of a high horse saying, I'm not going to make weapons anymore. But then he starts making these weaponized suits. And then what happens when these weaponized suits fall into the wrong hands? You know, we have so many in Civil War. We have all these superheroes now. We have all these superheroes, and they're doing reality shows, and they're causing trouble. Do we need to regulate them? Have we gone too far? Are we not really looking out for the greater good, the greater public anymore? The alcoholism, demon in a bottle. At the same time, I enjoy the Mandarin as a villain and a lot of, you know, the more traditional just Iron Man superhero stories. So I think these movies have always been lacking a really just a strong an iconic villain to serve as a foil for Iron Man. I mean, Thor has Loki, and Loki's turned into this. Now Loki's this massive pop cultural icon phenomenon, which is amazing.
I think that's helped by the actor who's playing him.
Yes. So now that we have this Iron Man trilogy now, and looking at it as a trilogy. It's just kind of, I see it more as this showcase for Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. playing Tony Stark. But also the unfortunate thing is that, you know, when Robert Downey Jr. was cast in this role, it sort of made a lot of sense. Here we have a man whose life sort of mirrors that of Tony Stark. You know, a guy who kind of went over the edge. He's redeemed himself. This is what happens with Tony Stark repeatedly. How far can a guy go and do all these bad, messed up things, and can he come back from that? And can we still like this guy? Can he still salvage his life?
I want to get your reaction. Hang on, I want to get your reaction to something because we've got some people listening to the show, and we're not taking callers, but I do want to take a comment that was posted by someone who had some real issues with this movie. I think the Mandarin plot was a waste of the definitive arch nemesis of the titular hero due to just how differently they made the character from his updated non-xenophobic version. This plot actually was much more suited to characters like the Ghost, AIM, and by extension of AIM, MODOK. Your reaction?
I think what this movie was missing was a cool character like Ghost. I would have loved to have seen someone like Ghost in this movie. People like Savin kind of play this sort of Ghost-type role. I think we could have used a character like that. I would have loved to have seen more of AIM as sort of this nefarious mad science think tank, you know, wearing the beekeeper outfits. You know, I would have thought it would have been awesome if they considered Killian their scientist supreme. That's another sort of AIM reference there. Now, MODOK, I like the MODOK character. Let me just be clear on that. But that is not a character you can just do on film willy-nilly, because he's such a bizarre-looking and just a bizarre character in general. That he's not a character that translates to film easily. Look at Green Lantern and what happened with Hector Hammond. It's tough to do just a bizarre comic character like that on screen without it looking ridiculous and for people to actually buy into it.
That's a strong point, Jeff.
We can never see. Now, just let me finish. I'm not saying we can never see MODOK. I'm just saying I think for a movie like this, you would have lost the audience there. And look, this movie just made $175 million. It's already made like over $500 million worldwide. So the results speak for themselves.
Well, I was going to say, you made a point at the top of the show, and it bears repeating at this point before we move on to the next topic, and that is these movies are not just made for comic book fans. The Batman movies were not made just for comic book fans. None of these are. These are cultural sort of phenomenon experiences that are set to attract the widest audience possible, women and children alike. So you know, there's more of my wife out there who never picked up a comic book in her life, and I can just, you know, and her reaction to, I think of her as somebody who is a really good example of the wider audience. If you showed her Ben Kingsley with how that storyline played out, and then just showed her a picture of MODOK, I guarantee you she responds sort of, you know, I guarantee you she responds more positively to the Ben Kingsley arc than she does a picture of MODOK.
Right.
So let me ask you this now, sort of playing on the another comment that was made by a lot of people in your review and in other places, is they felt like there wasn't necessarily enough action and not enough of Iron Man doing stuff. It's Tony Stark doing things, not enough Iron Man fighting bad guys, and not enough for the suit. And even you made a comment that the suit almost becomes, especially the Mach 42, almost becomes the butt of a joke, a running gag. And
it was. I mean, it's not like it. That's exactly what it was.
Okay. Well, let me say this to you, and I want to get your reaction to it. I think movies have to be about people. You know, when you start getting into every scene must be action, and you always have to see the hero doing stuff, it almost ends up becoming a special effects reel, which is what you want to avoid. That's the Phantom Menace. This was about a person and a guy in a situation, and he had a hero's arc. He had stuff he had to overcome. A lot of it was internal, and I really enjoyed the fact that it was a stripped down Tony having to go back to his roots. It actually mirrored the first movie very nicely, where he's got to start all over again with scraps, which is something that you pointed out in your review.
Right.
Just talk to me a little bit about that, and sort of in response to these people who I think they go into these movies just thinking it's going to be a video game, scene after scene of action, and that's not a movie.
Right. Well, let's just sort of clarify this. I did mention all those points in my review. This is sort of Tony. Tony was really built up since the Avengers. He's the billionaire playboy. He's got all the tools and all the gadgets. He can pretty much invent his way in and out of everything. So this movie took a lot of that away from him and kind of put him back into a proverbial cave in Afghanistan, where he didn't have his AI, he didn't have his mansion in his workshop, he didn't have his sort of vast, unlimited resources. Now, it was done in a sort of in a certain window of time where I thought it was believable. And in the movie, I liked seeing Tony he has to get by on his wits in what little he actually does have. That, I think, worked really well. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because, he is Iron Man, and we do have all these cool new suits that I want to see and enjoy and see all the new devices they have, see all their gadgets and weaponry. Now, that's fine. What they did, I think, was fine, and I think worked out well, in just trying to show that Tony is more than just the armor. However, my ultimate problem is that Tony has sort of an inferiority complex now where, like, I'm playing with these gods and monsters. I'm just a guy in a tin can. Okay, that arc was done well. But also there's this notion that he has PTSD. He kind of looked into the abyss. What does that do to a person?
Now, you felt like that wasn't handled as fully well as it could have been.
Exactly. That was another thing I think that might have been too much for this movie, because the way it started, the way it set up to me was perfect, and I thought, wow, this is interesting. Can Tony? It's not as good as dealing with the alcoholism, which we're never going to see as long as Marvel is at Disney. But to me, it was an interesting consolation prize. What happens when you look into the abyss and you go that far? Are these dreams Tony's having, are they really just panic attacks? Is this Thanos sending a message to Tony, hey, I'm coming after you guys. I'm coming to Earth and I'm going to make you guys my toys?
Well,
I don't know. I would have liked to see I would have liked to see more of that. And the way they solved that problem to me was not emotionally fulfilling, and it was not satisfying.
I think it's tough, Jeff. Because again, as a person whose profession is in the realm of psychology, I felt like it was just enough to keep the movie light and entertaining. But this is not. Oh God, what was the television show that was about rehab? Okay, well, it's not that show. It's
one with what's his name, Benjamin?
Yeah, I think it was on HBO. Doesn't matter. Anyway, it ain't that. I think you have to develop this balance, and not every director, not every writer does a great job of this. But I actually think this movie pulled it off well. And yes, this is not. Thank you very much. That would have bugged me all night. Yeah, this is not in treatment. You have to keep it light enough so that people remember they're at a fun popcorn-eating movie while giving it some emotional heft so that it isn't the Phantom Menace. Right. And I felt like this movie hit the nice in-between very well. And I would tell you that I think it did a better job of that than any of the Nolan movies did. And I'm not by any way complaining about the Nolan Batmans at all. I love them. But just to give you an example, again, using my wife here as sort of the model, my wife loved all three of the Iron Man movies. Hid in my armpit during The Dark Knight and refused to go see The Dark Knight Rises.
Right,
they leaned too far to one side. And then again, if you go far to the other side, you get the Fantastic Four movies, which everyone hates because they're too kiddie.
I think,
go ahead.
With Batman, we just have, Batman just has always had the most classic and iconic villains. You know, you can write entire stories about, you know, the villains in Batman's Rogues Gallery. And Bane in his purest essence is a great character. Nolan kind of gave his own take on the Bane character. He kind of took away the whole, okay, I used a special formula to grow huge muscles and all that, but he kind of kept that sort of, you know, this intellect where I'm going to systematically break Batman down. I'm going to, you know, break him spiritually and physically. I'm going to do that. And then you had Catwoman. You had Anne Hathaway doing basically a traditional version of Catwoman, and then you had Heath Ledger, Joker Unleashed. So that's kind of the benefit that Batman has. The villains are more interesting than Batman.
Oh, absolutely. It's the same thing in Superman, I think. Whereas this movie, the whole thing rests on Robert Downey Jr.'s shoulders, which is the next point that I wanted to get to. Let's talk about Gwyneth Paltrow and Don Cheadle. One of my father's pet peeves with women in movies, especially action movies, is he very much detests the do-nothing damsel in distress. He likes women in the action movies who actually do something, that are heroes in their own right. They make great fish out of water characters.
Right.
I actually think that by the time we get to this one, they almost get the Pepper Potts character. They almost do her justice, in my opinion. I was kind of hoping we'd see her, because I know that there were rumors that you get to see Gwyneth Paltrow in the armor. I thought they were going to do the rescue bit more, and not necessarily just use the armor as a big shield. But I want to get your reaction to that first with her and then Cheadle. Do you feel like they gave her enough to do where she was not a do-nothing but a heroine in her own right?
Yes, I was very happy with what we saw from Gwyneth Paltrow in this movie. I don't know why Paltrow has such this polarizing personality right now, and why she's like being voted as the most hated celebrity. A lot of the kind of pepper breaking out material in this movie came from Robert Downey Jr., who's he's clearly like a total fanboy for Gwyneth Paltrow. He was also one of the guys who got her into Avengers, which I think totally enhances that movie and makes for me, it made Avengers having her there just that much more better, and sort of raised the stakes to kind of have, okay, we're seeing Tony in a stable relationship. He's got, a nice girlfriend now. He's not, he's being more responsible. I like that. In this movie, I love seeing Pepper kind of break out and kind of just stop being the damsel in distress and kind of saving the day. I think that's great. And I think anyone that has a problem with that really, I'm not going to call you sexist, but, I think you kind of, maybe you are. But I don't think we should have seen rescue in this movie. I think this movie did a good job of hinting at that. If they did make her into rescue in some other movie, I think that would be totally great. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing that, because I think Gwyneth Paltrow finally kind of stops by the end. She's no longer on the sidelines, and she finally kind of like takes control, and I really dug it. She was cooler than Tony at the end in some respects.
Another comment from the Peanut Gallery here. There's a comment regarding Paltrow looking disinterested every time she's in a scene that doesn't involve romance with her and Robert Downey Jr. Now, my reaction to that is that she may have been very, very comfortable in the more intimate person-to-person scenes with Robert Downey Jr., where I think she does a fine job of acting. But if this person was picking up on disinterest in some of the action scenes, to me that's a failure of direction, not a problem with the actor. This is actually an argument that I got into with a friend of mine over green screen and such, where actors on the set of Star Wars the new Star Wars movies were complaining that they can't act with props and green screen, and I said that's not the actor's fault. That's Lucas's fault. So I don't know, did you pick that up about Paltrow, and would you agree that when you're dealing with a special effects movie like this one, and you have to have the actors sort of reacting to what's going to be done in post, essentially, on a computer, that the director really then has to step in and make sure he's getting the appropriate reactions from his actors, and you can't really lay that at Paltrow's feet?
I didn't really get that sense from this movie. I think my only problem is that sometimes the comedy was poorly timed and poorly executed. While the comedy is funny, like it's deflating at some points. Like there was a scene where Maya Hansen comes to their house and nothing really happens. Like, I want to know, okay, Maya, you're here. Why are you here? Why are we all joking about the stupid bunny with huge knockers before, things start blowing up? To me, that scene was a little poorly executed, and it was a bit of a waste of time. Maya Hansen, to me, was the only character that kind of bothered me, and I think was kind of a pointless character that could have really been cut from the movie completely. So Gwyneth Paltrow's acting didn't really bother me in the movie so much as Rebecca Hall as Maya Hansen.
I see what you're saying about that scene, and I felt like, it's a juggling act, isn't it? It goes back to what I was saying before, is you have to have balance in a movie, and they needed to. The subplot there with Paltrow and Robert Downey Jr. is there's this relationship that's under duress because Tony is dealing with psychological issues. They're taking on different roles in the greater universe, and that's creating tension, which was fine. It's hard to balance that with a guy running around in a suit of armor shooting terrorists. So I think they tried. I mean, the scene was there to sort of play on the fact that he's a sort of reformed playboy, and this is still a bone of contention with Gwyneth Paltrow. Though I am reminded of something I saw the other day, sort of off topic here, but I saw sort of a funny trailer for Iron Man 2, and one of the lines in it was like the real Iron Man 2 trailer, and it was like, Gwyneth Paltrow doesn't have a problem with her boyfriend wearing the Iron Man suit, but freaks out when he drives a car, and they flash to him in the Monaco scene, which was a funny editorial comment about Iron Man 2, which I think they corrected with this one. She seems more accepting of the fact that he goes headfirst into danger, but the problem she's having with him is his coping mechanism is dragging him further and further away from her, by virtue of him constantly creating all of these suits of armor. You can react to that.
And I thought all that was good. I like the scene where they're at home. He admits he's having problems. They go to sleep, and then the armor kind of attacks her at night, and then she's like, fiddle, like, tinker with that. I thought that was a great scene.
No, I think it is too. Like I said, I liked a lot of the chemistry between the two of them and the tension. I think people have to remember part of the story structure of a movie is the hero has to get over stuff. What do you think, Lily? What do you think the hero and the heroine should do in a movie? They should play, absolutely.
They should play and beat up that guy.
Exactly. They should have done like a Batman and Robin. They should have done like a Batman and Robin thing and just had a War Machine, Iron Man, and Rescue all running at the camera at the same time. No, I'm just kidding. But speaking of the Iron Patriot, a.k.a.
Don
War Machine, here's a character who I feel got ripped off. And I actually wanted to have a long conversation about Cheadle here because I got a couple of things brewing about what they're going to do with this guy. But I feel like this movie, they had him in there because they needed him to do a couple of things with the plot, but ultimately I felt like if there's a do-nothing character in this movie, it was him. I feel like he got ripped off, and they really didn't use Cheadle and the Iron Patriot suit to its full advantage.
I agree with that. Don Cheadle did not have much to do. Iron Patriot did not have much to do in this movie. I love the imagery that they worked the Iron Patriot armor into this movie. I thought that was a great idea, but Don Cheadle actually does very little in the movie overall, either as Rhodey or as Iron Patriot. I think there was a lost opportunity when you had War Machine in the last movie where he says, okay, I'm just going to take your suit. Okay, so now a guy in the Air Force, now the government has Tony's suit. In the movie, neither Iron Man 2 or Iron Man 3 really deals with that. And to me, that's a little problematic because the whole contention in Iron Man 2 is you want the suits, you can't have them. I'm keeping them. I know what to do best with these suits. You don't get to share my technology or turn them into a weapon. Okay, your best friend has a suit now and he's turned it over to the government. Okay, well, as long as only you have the suit, I trust you, and that's okay, and I will let you have it. I think that did not come into play enough, and that's kind of that was kind of my misgiving with Iron Man 2 was, okay, so that just happened, and we're just not going to talk about that. And I think that's stuff you can't really just leave to tell in prequel comic books that no one reads.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering why there wasn't a meeting of the minds on how to play off of that. It was just, as you said, it was just sort of summarily dropped, and then they had Don Cheadle in the movie to have Don Cheadle in the movie. And I don't know enough about, I know more about U.S. Agent than I know about Iron Patriot, so I couldn't tell you what he means to the Iron Man universe. Like, I remember War Machine. And I also know that, and this sort of leads to my next point, I also know that for a while, Rhodey was Iron Man for a stretch when Tony Stark was incapacitated due to alcoholism. Now, let me ask you this, Jeff.
Go ahead.
Robert Downey Jr. is signed on to do another Avengers movie. That may mean, one more movie for him. It may mean several more movies down the road. But it looks like the Iron Man trilogy in and of itself is done. And after the Avengers 2, when they go on to do Avengers 3, 4, and 5, do you think that they'll just allow Robert Downey Jr. to distance himself from the Marvel Universe and allow Don Cheadle to just pick up the mantle? Let him be Iron Man while they bring in some other new characters as leads, and he's still in a supporting role, but at least they get to have the Iron Man character.
That could be one way they go about it. Currently, Robert Downey Jr. is not signed on for any other movies. He's reportedly renegotiating. So at $678 million worldwide right now and climbing, I find it very hard to believe he and Disney will not come to an agreement for Avengers 2. Beyond that, I think the ball's really just in Marvel's court in figuring this out. I think because all those things you mentioned have precedence, you could go a number of ways. Maybe the way this movie went, maybe Tony's going to decide to just fade into the background. Maybe Tony will retire. Maybe he will hand things over to Rhodey. Maybe Rhodey will be War Machine. Maybe he'll be Iron Man. They could do that. Or they could just quietly recast the role of Tony Stark. I mean, well, it won't be quiet, but they could do that, and Marvel's done it before, and it's destined to happen at some point. These characters have been around forever. There are many interpretations of the character. Of course, Robert Downey Jr. laid the groundwork, and it's very hard to envision anyone else playing this role. But that's not to say no one else can ever play this role ever again. Someone else is going to play Tony Stark at some point. It is inevitable.
Let me contend that for just a moment. I actually don't think they should try to recast the role. I would be more comfortable with them just letting Don Cheadle be Iron Man. And the only way I would bring Robert Downey Jr. back is if they're going to do a major Marvel epic like Civil War. And Civil War would be incredibly hard to pull off on screen. They would definitely have to rework that in a way. But hang on a second. But unless they're going to give Robert Downey Jr. something big, something really, really huge to dig his heels into as an actor, because just side thing, actors need new challenges, and I think what happens is with a lot of these movies, these comic book type, these epics, blockbusters, is that actors don't want to be forever seen as that one character. And now Robert Downey Jr. has this, large filmography to go back to, so I don't think he'd have a huge problem with that. But, this is about a guy here, and a guy who wants to be challenged as an actor. And for him, I can only imagine, he's thinking, I've done my bit for God and Country. I did this thing. I've got my legacy. I want to go do something else now. I want to do the pickup artist too. Who the hell knows? But my point being that if I'm Disney and Marvel and I'm Robert Downey Jr., I'm thinking the only reason to bring him back is to do something, and maybe not Civil War itself, but something like that. Go ahead.
I don't think it's that drastic. He got paid. When all is said and done, he got paid apparently $50 million for Avengers 2. Maybe there's going to be 100 million reasons why he'll want to come back for Avengers 2. Civil War is not a story you can just do in a sequel. You can't just. There's no way that could happen in Avengers 2. And
no, that's got to be a Phase 4 movie.
If ever, and if you ever did Civil War, it would have to be drastically, and I mean drastically different from how it was executed in the comics.
Sure.
And the roles might have to be reversed. Just like this movie was sort of a variation on a comic story called Extremis. It was very different from Extremis. It used some of the same characters and a couple similar plot points, but other than that, it was night and day different from Extremis. So you could maybe take some elements of Civil War, but even to me, and I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but Civil War was sort of a stupid, absurd story. I don't want to say stupid, but it was absurd.
You really didn't like it? I love Civil War. I thought it was a great idea.
I think to me, Civil War was a gimmick, and I don't want to see just a gimmick story get done, because as a longtime fan, there are a lot more classic stories and better stories than Civil War that we should see first.
Yeah, no, we're not going to get the Secret Wars either. just saying.
Secret Wars, but something such as the Masters of Evil. That would be something. That's a great classic. Basically, the anti-Avengers. You don't have to call them the Masters of Evil, but a Masters of Evil like group. Thanos is a gigantic threat for them to deal with, so there's that.
Right, but I think that they're doing that in the Avengers 2, it looks like. So, and I suspect he'll be back for the Avengers 2, but post-Avengers 2 is really what I was referring to. Avengers
2, it's hard to...
Sure.
Yeah, it's hard to see how much longer he'll keep doing this. He's 48 years old. He's 48 years old now. But, hey, he was on the Daily Show and saying, hey, I'm looking at the back nine. So take that for what it's worth.
Sure. Just in the interest of time, I want to spend a little bit of time on the conclusion. Now, again, I want to make sure that people listening to this podcast are clear. I liked Iron Man 3. Thought it was a perfectly... You didn't see it. You don't have an opinion.
Daddy.
1 second, Lily. You were at the theme park with your grandparents. I like this movie, and so I don't want people to hear this and go, oh, Jesus, Radulich is bitching. No, Radulich is quibbling, not bitching. I was not particularly enthused by the ending. I think as a standalone trilogy, this sort of bucks the trend of the last movie being the absolute worst. The Iron Mans go great, not so great, we're back to great again. So, like I said, by no means am I saying that this was bad. And as a standalone trilogy, the ending tied things up a little too neatly for my taste, but at least I can accept that. The problem is, if as a trilogy in a greater Marvel universe, I was really annoyed by how it ended. One, he cures Pepper Potts in a sentence. It was whatever tension there was built up by her being in dire circumstances. Okay, Lily, give me 10 more minutes. They built up all this tension with her being in danger with the extremists, and then poof, it was gone. And then, of course, and I don't know, and this is what I wanted to ask you, you being the bigger Marvel file than I am, did he ever actually get the shrapnel out of his chest? And I know that's a minor quibble here, but it still annoyed the living piss out of me because I don't think that ever actually happened.
We're talking about it gets very muddled. I forget exactly when. I think at some point his heart was repaired, and then he gets all these different problems that causes him to wear an arc reactor again. Now, just to be specific, at one point there was a time where a time-traveling supervillain called Kang sort of made Iron Man his underling, where Iron Man was Kang's servant the whole time. So then what did they do? They went back in time and got 19-year-old Tony Stark without any physical ailments to be Iron Man. So now you have this teenage Tony Stark running around as Iron Man, and then all the heroes died and heroes were born from Onslaught, and then in a new universe, Tony's an adult again, and then they bring him out of that universe and he's 100% healthy. He's still a recovering alcoholic, but he doesn't have...
This is why we get made fun of for being comic book geeks, Jeff.
Exactly. But, I mean, this is kind of the problem with comics, is that when you have 50 years of history, there's all sorts of crazy crap that happens.
I'm going through this now with the Hulk, where I'm trying to get, just thinking about, and I don't want to get off on that with this podcast. We have plenty of time for that in a future one. But I'm just thinking about the Hulk and ways that they could, and I'm going back and I'm reading through all of this history, and I'm like, Jesus Christ. There's a bit where Banner is the insane one and Hulk's the sane one, and I'm like, oh my God, this is why I stopped reading comics in the first place. So I totally get your point.
You see, the thing is, because these are serialized characters, and they're in this perpetual state of serialization that it's constantly going back and forth. All these really crazy things happen where it goes in one direction and then it goes in the complete opposite direction. So now Tony, I think what he has is he has armor that literally comes out of his body, basically, as sort of a variation of the Extremis virus, something like that. I don't think he has the shrapnel in his heart anymore. At one point, he had a heart attack and his heart nearly went out. So his armor put in arc reactor.
But that's my point. Is
crazy crap happens.
Right, and in the first movie, this condition is so bad he has to wear a power plant inside of his chest, and by the third movie he goes to a surgeon. He goes to John Hopkins and gets it done. We're like, wait a minute, why didn't you do that when you got back to America? At the very least, that could have been the ending of the first Iron Man. I think if the story they're trying to tell is by the end of this, yes, he could have done that all along, but before he felt compelled to be a superhero. He no longer feels that compulsion.
Maybe
it was a rocky path to get me there, and it's not a strong enough path to make me believe that that's true.
From my perspective, that was something that always could have been done. He was just using it, but he was using his sort of physical infirmity, as it were, as a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
This is my excuse to continue being Iron Man. Now he apparently doesn't have that dilemma anymore. That's the way I saw it.
Sure, and I think my problem is, I think you telling that to me, if you were saying let's write the script and that be the conclusion, I'm willing to buy that and accept it. What I saw on screen wasn't strong enough to get me there.
I think that's a reasonable argument. At the same time, these movies, they're a variation of the comics, and they kind of, I don't want to say dumb down, but they streamline it. They more or less. But
even as a movie, though, Jeff, right. It's the old, we're running out of time. Quick, end the fucking movie. You know what I mean?
Again, I agree. I agree with the argument, but for the movie, it did not hurt the movie. It did not hurt the experience.
Yeah,
overall.
It was more of that was more of a gas pain, not a major heart attack for me. You know what I mean? Just
as a fan, I can nitpick these things to death and all.
Sure.
Okay, they could have done it. They could have done it better this way. They could have done it better that way. But to me, they get a lot more right than they do wrong. I know the Mandarin is going to be a big sticking point on a lot of people, and I know some casual fans were just upset because, hey, we wanted to see Ben Kingsley being this cool, badass, mashup of Osama bin Laden in the Mandarin that looked pretty cool. And I think that's a reasonable argument as well. I can totally see where people are coming from there. But I'm just so, as a fan, I'm just so excited to finally just be seeing all this sort of come to life on screen.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I've enjoyed the Marvel Universe since Disney took it over. I've enjoyed all three of the Iron Man movies. I liked Thor. I mean, a lot of people crapped on Thor, and I was like, well, I mean, come on. They were trying to get to the Avengers. So that whole slew of movies was, could have been better, but they had a bigger, they had a huge outcome in mind that they were trying to get to. So I can forgive them for kind of writing prologue movies instead of movies. I'm very much looking forward to The Dark World. That looks phenomenal. I'm looking forward to UFC 170 GSP versus Captain America. That looks fantastic. Like 5 people listening to the podcast get that joke. And I'm looking forward to Ant-Man in the next Avengers movie. I mean, so far since Disney's been doing this, Disney's been doing these Marvel movies, I've enjoyed them. I don't really think they've made a bad one. That's why when people start talking about Star Wars, and Disney doing Star Wars and being fretful over that, I'm like, well, they've got a pretty good track record here. I don't know what there is to be all upset about. Last question for you, and then we're going to start to close out here. If you would, if Jeffrey Harris had been directing this movie, and this was sort of your vehicle, anything that you would have done differently? What would you have done? What would you have liked to have seen happen?
My biggest point of contention with this film is the PTSD and the way it was resolved in this film, because I was so intrigued by the way that subplot was set up. I would have had something happen where the PTSD is more than just panic attacks. It's actually a harbinger of something more sinister. And, maybe is Tony just, or did Tony see something? When Tony went to the other side, did Tony see something? Now, kind of like Lovecraft, is he going insane, or is there something really horrible company? Foreshadowing. Doctor Who does it a lot. There's a lot, usually when these things happen on Doctor Who, it's kind of a symbol of something worse coming along. Like, is he just nuts? Is he just seeing things, or is something wicked on its way? That is what I probably would have done differently. All the other things are really just kind of nitpicky things I have about it. Well, I wanted to see more cool armor stuff, but this movie was about sort of challenging Tony again and taking his armor away from him and making him, can he deal with things without the armor? So that's kind of it.
Okay, one point that I wanted to make before we closed out was I thought this did a better job of making Tony a detective than any of the Batman movies ever did, when Batman was actually a detective. I was really fascinated by Tony's ability to, figure out a mystery, and get to the bottom of things, and not just run around in a big suit blowing stuff up like a high-tech Hulk. That was one of the major points to me about the movie that I really enjoyed.
I agree, and that's always been a problem I've had with the Nolan films, is that Batman is less of a scientist and a detective in the movies. There was that one really good scene with Bruce Wayne in the Batcave in The Dark Knight Rises. There were a couple scenes like that in The Dark Knight, but to me it wasn't. It was just sort of Nolan's take on the character, and Batman was a bit of a less interesting character as a result. We don't get the world's greatest detective in Nolan's movies, but that's not really what Nolan is going for,
No, you got that more with Iron Man, and I don't know if he was necessarily like that in the comic book, but it was. I think you have to kind of go into a lot of these Marvel movies with an open mind, maybe even a blank slate, and just show me what there is to show me, and either you like it or you don't. So, like I said, you gave it, I think, a 7 or an 8. No, it was an 8.5, right? Was your score?
My score was 8.5.
Right. Yeah, I would go along with that.
Now, I'm going to be honest. I think I did probably overrate Iron Man 2 when it came out. I think I did review Iron Man 2. I stand by my review and rating of the Avengers. I think when I first saw Iron Man 2, I was just so excited. Oh, we're Iron Man, Tony Stark. And I think Iron Man does get a little unfairly maligned. It is flawed. I don't think it's a terrible movie. But
none of them were terrible, but it's the weakest of the three.
I think sometimes over time our tastes adjust and our views change, and I don't think that's wrong.
Okay, the next summer blockbuster series movie that we're going to review will be Star Trek Into Darkness. So that'll be in 2 weeks. There was no MMA show this past Sunday for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was there was nothing to talk about, including Chael Sonnen's Delusions of Grandeur. Tomorrow night, Long Road to Ruin resumes. We'll be doing the Dollars trilogy, and a week from tomorrow, the 401 music review podcast will be back. We'll be doing the new Fin Troll album. So that's what I got going on. Jeff, what do you got going on?
I love it when it's like a slow MMA news week and we just get something. Chael Sonnen wants to buy the WWE. Okay, let's run with that, MMA media.
Yeah, I had to ignore that just due to the absurdity, but it did make me laugh a little bit that became the big headline.
Yeah, I know, but slow news week. What are you going to do?
Indeed. What do you now? What's next for you to review? What do you got going on?
Right now I'm working on another comic book superhero thing. I got Superman Unbound on Blu-ray, so I'll be reviewing the Blu-ray of that. Hopefully going to once I have a couple other writing assignments, so hopefully going to get in the Star Trek the video game review, sort of the bridge between the first and second movie. And a couple other things. MMA's 3 R's is this week, so be sure to look at that. Still thinking, Ben Folks wrote a really weird column this week about women's MMA. I might have to take a look at that. We'll see.
All right. So that's that. Again, Long Road to Ruin Tuesday. The MMA 401 Ground and Pound radio show will be back Sunday night at 9 o'clock to preview Belfort versus Luke Rockhold, UFC on FX8. For the 401 Jack of all trades, Jeff Harris, this has been the 411 Movie Zone Summer Blockbuster Series. I thought this was a hell of a podcast. Can't wait to do the next one in 2 weeks.
Mark, thank you very much for having me on. 411 readers and listeners, peace, live long and prosper.
All right, folks. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Have a great day.
Bye.